Steam has a way of making a room lie to you. It softens edges, blurs faces, turns a stranger's silhouette into something almost gentle. Yvonne Callahan had learned, over 11 years of pressing her thumbs into the shoulders of the wealthiest and most dangerous people in the city, that steam was the best liar in the building. It hid trembling hands. It hid held breath. It hid the particular stillness of a person waiting for something terrible to happen. The Aurelia occupied 4 floors of a converted stone bank building on the quiet end of the financial district, behind a door with no sign, reachable only by appointment and referral. Inside, it did not look like a business. It looked like the private wing of someone's inherited fortune. Marble the color of clotted cream, water moving somewhere unseen, the smell of bergamot in hot stone drifting from unmarked doors. Senators came here. So did men whose names never appeared on anything they owned. The staff were trained to notice nothing, remember nothing, repeat nothing. Yvonne was better at all 3 than any of them because she had discovered, somewhere around her 3rd year on the floor, that a heavy-set woman with a towel cart was the most invisible object in any room that mattered. People stepped around her. They lowered their voices for the manager and raised them again the moment Yvonne walked past, because on some unspoken register, she didn't count as a listener. She had a half-finished psychology degree gathering dust and an accidental, thorough education in how powerful people behaved when they believed no one capable of understanding them was in the room. Adrian Valenti was one of the few exceptions, not because he confided in her, he confided in no one as far as she could tell, but because he treated her like a person had a right to be treated, which in her experience made him almost eccentric. He remembered her name after the first appointment. He asked and waited for the answer. Once, after a session that ran late into a rainy evening, he'd left an envelope on the table that turned out to hold 4 months of her rent, with no note, no comment, nothing to acknowledge it had happened at all, except that the next time he came in, he greeted her exactly the same as always. She had decided, privately, that whatever else Adrian Valenti was, and the rumors about what he was took up whole careful paragraphs in newspapers that were always vague about specifics, he was not a man who mistook her for furniture. That was, she would later understand, the entire reason she didn't let him die. He came in on a Thursday evening in early November, and the Aurelia changed shape around him the way it always did. Not louder, not more obvious, but tighter, more attentive, every staff member's spine finding an extra half-inch of straightness. Julian Mercer walked half a step behind him, laughing at something, one hand briefly on Adrian's shoulder in the easy, proprietary way of a man who had earned the right to touch him. Julian had been at Adrian's side for going on 12 years. He was the one person who could interrupt Adrian mid-sentence and not be looked at twice for it. He had arranged tonight's appointment himself, calling ahead, requesting the West Suite, mentioning casually to Evelyn Hart at the front desk that Adrian's usual therapist could take the evening if she liked, since he'd found someone new he wanted Adrian to try. Yvonne heard aloud it secondhand from Evelyn, 20 minutes before it happened. She felt the small, familiar sting of a client being handed off, filed it under nothing, and went to restock the linen closet on the east wing instead. She would think about that fact for a long time afterward, how close she had come to spending that whole evening folding towels. It was the allergy consultation that put her back in the hallway. Club protocol required a staff member to verify oil sensitivities with any new pairing before treatment began, a 5-minute formality nobody enjoyed and everybody skipped when they could. Yvonne, harried, waved Yvonne toward the West Suite with a clipboard and a sigh. Just confirm nothing's changed on his intake form and get out of the new girl's way. The new girl was already in the corridor outside the suite, and Yvonne clocked her before she'd finished the thought that she should. Serena Vale was lovely in the specific, engineered way that Aurelia hired for. Trim, composed, dressed in the same charcoal uniform as everyone else, hair pulled back with a kind of precision that read as professional rather than nervous to anyone who wasn't looking for the difference. Yvonne was looking for the difference. She'd spent a decade learning to read the small tells that separated a person who was simply having a long shift from a person who was holding something down with both hands. Serena's was in her breathing, too even, too deliberately even, the breath of someone counting. It was in the way she checked the position of the rolled hot stone caddy on the cart 3 times in under a minute, adjusting it a half-inch each time as if the half-inch mattered. It was in the fact that she did not look at Yvonne at all, not once, not even the reflexive glance new staff gave each other in a hallway. She was rehearsing something. Yvonne had watched enough people rehearse things, apologies, negotiations, lies, to know the posture of it. New tonight? Yvonne asked, pleasant, harmless, the voice she used on everyone. Just started, Serena said, and smiled with her mouth only. Her eyes were on the door. Yvonne logged it and moved on, because that alone wasn't anything. New employees were nervous, that was ordinary, but the corridor gave her more before she reached the suite. Marcus Reed's men usually held 3 fixed points on this floor during a principal's visit: the elevator bank, the stairwell, and the small lounge outside the steam room where a man in a dark suit would sit with an untouched glass of water and pretend to be waiting for someone. Tonight, the lounge chair was empty. Tonight, there was a man near the service stairwell that didn't belong to Marcus's crew and didn't belong to housekeeping either. No earpiece, hands loose at his sides in a way that looked casual and wasn't, watching the West Suite's door and the gilt-framed mirror across from him, rather than looking at it directly, the way a person does when they don't want to be caught watching. Something in Yvonne's chest went very cold and very quiet. She thought about Julian, laughing, arranging the new pairing himself. She thought about how a man who has survived in Adrian's world for as long as Adrian had survives specifically by trusting almost no one, and how the entire architecture of tonight had been built by the one person he trusted completely. She could not scream. If she screamed, whoever was in that mirror would simply move his hand a fraction of a second sooner, and it would be over in the time it took her to draw the next breath. She could not go to Marcus, wherever he was. She didn't know, and she didn't have time to find out. She realized, walking the last few feet to the suite door, with the allergy clipboard trembling very slightly against her hip, exactly one option, and it depended on a memory from 8 months ago that she hadn't thought about since. She had been restocking the lounge late one night when Adrian was signing, actual sign language, quick and fluent, with Theo, the night valet who'd been deaf since birth. She remembered the ease of it, the way Adrian's hands had moved without any of the self-consciousness most hearing people brought to it, like it was a language his body already lived in rather than one he'd studied. She had learned enough ASL herself years ago for the handful of deaf clients the Aurelia occasionally served, mostly numbers and comfort and is this pressure all right? It would have to be enough. She knocked once and let herself in. Adrian was seated in the robe, unhurried, a glass of water at his elbow that he had not yet touched. He looked up at her with the mild, courteous attention he always gave her, and for one terrible second, she almost lost her nerve at how ordinary the room looked. The low light, the folded towels, the smell of eucalyptus, no hint anywhere that anything was wrong, except the thing she alone had seen. Allergy check, she said aloud, for the benefit of whoever might be listening at the door, and set the clipboard down beside him with a hand that was not quite steady. Then, angling her body so her back faced the door, and only Adrian could see her, she signed. Danger. Trust broken. Woman not real therapist. Men outside. Wait. She will try. She watched his face for the half second it took the meaning to land and understood with a jolt that she had guessed right about the language and wrong about everything else, because he did not look confused. He looked like a man receiving a briefing. His eyes flicked once to the door, then back to her, very steady. He signed back, small and economical, the movement almost hidden against his knee. How many? 2 outside. Her. Maybe more. Julian? She hesitated, and that hesitation was its own answer. His jaw did something almost imperceptible, a tightening, gone as fast as it came, the only visible crack in a composure she suspected had taken him a lifetime to build. Go, he signed. Act normal, say nothing. Everything checks out, Yvonne said out loud, picking the clipboard back up, her voice miraculously even. Her enjoy your evening, Mr. Valenti, was all professional warmth. She left the room with her professional smile fixed in place and her pulse roaring in her ears, loud enough that she was half surprised no one else could hear it. And she did not go far. She ducked into the linen alcove 2 doors down, ostensibly folding towels that were already folded, and she watched the corridor in the reflection of a framed mirror, the way, she now realized, the man by the stairwell had been watching the suite door and his. 2 could play at being furniture. Serena went in 4 minutes later, wheeling the cart with its neat rows of oils and its one rolled towel that sat, Yvonne now understood, at a slightly wrong angle, weighted with something the others weren't. The door closed. The corridor settled into its practiced hush, water running somewhere behind the walls, a hush that had swallowed 100 careless conversations and was about to swallow something much worse. Inside, the room did exactly what rooms like it were built to do. It relaxed him. Or it appeared to. Adrian let his shoulders soften under Serena's hands, let his breathing slow, gave every outward signal of a powerful man finally, gratefully off duty. And Yvonne, watching the light beneath the door for any change in the shadows, understood that this was not surrender. It was bait. He wanted her the moment she needed to commit, because a woman caught reaching for a weapon and a woman who has already drawn it are 2 very different problems, and he wanted her holding the second one when it happened. The shift when it came took less than a second and sounded like nothing at all. Steam and running water are excellent at swallowing small, decisive sounds. Yvonne heard the crash a half-breath later, a body against the treatment table, a tray of glass bottles shattering across marble, and then Adrian's voice, not raised, terrifyingly calm, saying something too low for her to catch. She was already moving toward the door when it was flung open from the inside, and the man from the stairwell mirror shoved past her, one hand going to his jacket. Yvonne did the only thing available to her, the same thing she'd done with a folded scrap of paper in another life she hadn't lived. She threw the fully loaded towel cart directly into his path with everything her body had, and had the strange, distant satisfaction of watching 200 pounds of Egyptian cotton and a man's own momentum do what she couldn't. By the time Marcus Reed's people came pouring down the corridor, weapons out, the scene inside the suite was already mostly finished. Serena lay pinned beneath Adrian's knee, the small pistol she'd had rolled into the towel skittering somewhere under the massage table, her composure gone entirely, replaced with the flat, resigned stillness of a professional who has just watched a job fail. And Julian, who had come running the moment the commotion started, who reached the doorway with his own weapon already drawn, ostensibly to help. Adrian's eyes were on him before he'd taken a second step into the room. Don't, Adrian said. Just that. Julian didn't stop. Whether it was panic or the last desperate move of a plan already dead, he raised the gun, and Adrian was faster, had always been faster, and put a single round through the center of Julian's hand before the older man could finish the motion. Julian screamed and folded to the floor, the gun clattering away, blood already blooming dark through his fingers, and the sound that came out of him afterward was not pain so much as grief, the sound of a man watching 12 years collapse into a single unrecoverable second. Adrian looked down at him for a long moment. He did not look angry. He looked like something had been surgically removed from his chest, and he hadn't yet located the wound. "You," he said quietly, "of all people." Julian didn't answer. There wasn't an answer that would have mattered. The Aurelia's discretion machine moved faster than the police did, the way it always had for its most valuable clients. Only this time, it was moving to protect the club's own name as much as Adrian's. Evelyn Hart, ashen but functional, was on the phone with the club's private security council before the last of Marcus's men had finished clearing the floor. By the time uniformed officers arrived, there was a clean story waiting for them. An attempted robbery, a struggling employee, a licensed firearm used in self-defense, corroborated by enough calm, credentialed voices that no one thought to look twice at the heavy-set massage therapist standing quietly near the reception desk, arms crossed over her chest, giving a statement so unremarkable the detective barely finished writing it down. "I heard a crash," Yvonne told him, letting her voice shake exactly the amount a person's voice should shake. "I didn't see much. I was scared." He believed her instantly, the way people always believed the version of her that took up space and asked for nothing. She let him. For 3 days afterward, her phone did not ring, and she told herself that was the end of it, a strange, terrible night that had nothing further to do with her. On the fourth evening, walking home from the corner market with a bag of groceries going soft with rain, a car eased to the curb beside her that had never once in 11 years had reason to know her address. The rear window came down. She recognized the man in the front seat as one of Marcus's. "Miss Callahan, Mr. Valenti would like to see you, if you're willing." She got in. The drive took 40 minutes, out past the last of the streetlights, to a house on the water that looked less like a residence than a fortress that learned good manners. Adrian was waiting in a study lined floor to ceiling with books that looked red rather than decorative, a fire going against the November damp, a glass of something dark already poured and waiting on the low table across from his chair. For her, she understood, before she'd even sat down. "You could have stayed out of that room," he said without preamble, once the door had closed behind her. "The night, I do not doubt, you would have been perfectly safe pretending you saw nothing. It's what everyone else in that building would have done." "You said thank you to me," Yvonne said. "Every single time. I've served 1,000 men in that building who've never once looked at me like I was in the room. You always did." She picked up the glass because her hands needed something to do, and found the bourbon did in fact help. "I wasn't going to watch you die over it." Something moved behind his eyes. Not quite surprise. Recognition. "You read Serena in under 2 minutes. You read the position of that man in the mirror before my own security did, and then you found a way to warn me that no one in that hallway could have detected, in a language you had no particular reason to know." He leaned forward, forearms on his knees, and looked at her the way she suspected he looked at very little in his life, without calculation. "I don't waste people like you, Yvonne. I've been trying to think of what to call the job I want to offer you, and I keep landing on the truth of it, which is that I want you in every room I'm in, watching what my own people are too close to see." "That's not a massage therapist's job description." "No," he agreed. "It pays considerably better, and I'd very much like you to accept it anyway." She thought about the years she'd spent being underestimated in exchange for a wage that barely covered her rent, and about the particular singular fact that the most dangerous man in the city was sitting across from her, offering to make her invisibility into a career instead of a survival tactic. She thought too, though she didn't say it, about the way his hands had moved when he signed to her, steady, sure, without a single wasted motion, a man who listened even when no sound was being made. "I have conditions," she said. The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile. "Of course you do." The months that followed rearranged something in her she hadn't known was foldable. Officially, she was a client relations consultant on the books of Valenti Maritime Holdings, a title vague enough to survive scrutiny. Unofficially, she sat in the corner of rooms where fortunes and territories changed hands, said almost nothing, and told Adrian afterward in the car or over the last of a late dinner who had been lying and who was afraid and who was both. In January, she caught a shipping partner mirroring a rival's body language too precisely to be accidental, and the resulting audit uncovered a skimming operation that had been running for 2 years under everyone's nose. In March, she noticed at a charity dinner meant to be entirely neutral ground that a supposed ally kept his phone face down and checked it with his thumb rather than picking it up. A man expecting a message he didn't want witnessed. And the tip saved Adrian 3 weeks of blindsided negotiation. Every time she was right, something in her spine straightened another degree. She stopped shrinking in doorways. She let a tailor Adrian sent without asking the first time, which had made her furious for exactly one afternoon before she tried the coat on, dress her not to disguise her size, but to announce it. Structured wool and deep jewel colors that made her look like a woman who had decided, finally, to take up precisely as much space as she wanted. She did not lose weight, and no one, not once, suggested she should. Adrian looked at her the same whether she was in the Aurelia's uniform or in silk, which was, she came to understand, the entire point of him. The two of them kept late hours together that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with neither one wanting the evening to end. Wine and takeout cartons spread across his desk, arguments about books, a running low-grade flirtation and neither of them named. It was on one of those nights, reaching across a spread of shipping manifests for a folder, that her hand landed on his, and he did not let go. "You spend every hour of your working life reading everyone else in the room," he said, low, his thumb moving once against her knuckles. "Tell me what you've read in me." "That you're careful," she said, because it was easier than the truer answer. "That you don't say things you don't mean." "Then believe me when I say this." He stood, drawing her up with him, close enough that she had to tip her head to hold his eyes. "I have never in my life felt safe with another person the way I feel safe with you. I don't intend to spend one more day pretending that isn't love." She didn't have a clever answer ready, which was rare enough that she'd remember it for the rest of her life. She simply reached up and kissed him first, and he made a low sound against her mouth, like something long held had finally been set down. The Aurelia reopened in April with a private gala to mark its renovation. The same marble floors, the same hush, dressed now with flowers and candlelight for an audience of billionaires, politicians, and men whose businesses didn't bear close inspection. Every person in that room had, at some point, walked past Yvonne Callahan without seeing her. She made sure this time that they could not look away. The sapphire gown Adrian's tailor had built for exactly this evening moved with her instead of against her, and she wore it the way she'd learned to wear everything now, like it belonged to her rather than the other way around. When the doors opened and Adrian walked in with her hand tucked into his arm, the room's usual composed murmur dropped into a silence so complete she could hear the candle flames. A rival she'd recognized from a dozen careful negotiations stepped forward first, recovering his manners quickly, though not quickly enough to hide the shock when he said, "Mr. Valenti, and this is—" "Yvonne," Adrian said, before the man could finish reaching for a lesser word. He didn't raise his voice. He never had to. "She's the reason I'm alive to be standing in this room at all. and she is the only person in this city whose judgment I trust without question. If any of you have made the mistake of underestimating her, I'd encourage you to correct it. I intend to." He turned his head and kissed her temple, unhurried, in front of every one of them, and Yvonne felt the old, familiar sensation of being watched by a room full of powerful people. Except this time, it wasn't the comfortable invisibility she'd spent a career hiding inside. It was something she'd never once let herself want out loud, until a man who noticed everything had decided deliberately and completely to notice her. She had spent her whole life being told in 100 silent ways that she was easy to overlook. She understood now that she never had been. She had simply been waiting for someone worth being seen by.